Let me give you the backstory so you can fully appreciate what's going on. The leaders of Judah have boldly rebelled against God. The Bible says they have perverted justice. They have oppressed the righteous. They've done everything, you all, from idol worship to child sacrifice to murder to forming ungodly alliances with heathen nations. The leaders of Judah have led God's people into absolute disobedience. And Habakkuk considers how the folk are acting. He's looking at the way the folk are carrying on, Billy, and he's having a hard time understanding the ways of God. In other words, he doesn't understand how God is responding, or should I say he doesn't understand why God is not responding, because see, Habakkuk knows that God was a God who knew everything that was going on. So God knew how these folk were acting, yet it looked like God wasn't doing anything about it. He was having a hard time, watch this now, understanding how murders were happening and injustice was prevailing. How those who were commissioned to protect and serve were killing citizens, and instead of getting jail time, they were getting early retirements. Come on, talk to me, somebody. He was having a hard time understanding how young boys were selling crack on the corner and young girls were giving away their body like government commodities, and no one seemed to care. He was having a hard time understanding how there was division, dissection, disunion, and discord in a nation that claimed to be one nation under God. And so he comes to the conclusion, you all, that either God...
They don't know, don't show, I don't care about what's going on in the hood.
God don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. Are y'all praying with me? He says, why isn't God doing anything about what we're facing? And so in chapter number 1, he goes to God and he raises some questions and he levels some complaints. He says to God, God, how can you stand around and watch what's happening? Why will you not respond or react to what your people are doing? Why do you allow them to continue in their wickedness? Why do you turn a blind eye, dear God, to the behavior they are exhibiting? And the Bible says that the Lord answers him in chapter number 2 and chapter number 3. Now, let me interrupt the sermon and say this to you real quick. It's one thing to ask God a question. It's another thing to be able to handle God's answer. I wish I had somebody. So he goes to God with these questions and these complaints, and God turns around and has an answer for him. And you all, I want to go ahead and tell you up front, he was not ready for the answer that God gave him, because the Bible says that God answers Habakkuk by saying, you think I'm not doing anything, but what I'm doing is I'm preparing the Babylonians, I'm empowering the Babylonians as my weapon of righteousness against the idolatry of Judah in order to turn them back toward me. An attack, you all, can be divinely permitted demonic activity that God uses not to hurt you but to help you. God is not trying to destroy you but to develop you. Is there anybody that's been with God long enough to know that God has used some of the hard things of life? God has done some of the difficult things of life in order to bring you where you are today. Come on, don't play with me. You know you've not always had a mind to be at church on a Sunday morning. Once upon a time, Sunday morning was a mighty good time to recover from a Saturday night high. But the Lord used the hard things of life in order to bring you where you are right now. Second part is, whatever the attack is, if it's managed properly, it will result in your development. Okay, let me say this. Let me try it this way. If you manage the attack the right way, when the attack is over, the end result will be a level of maturity that you never would have had if you had not gone through what you would. Somebody talk back to me. Now, what that means is, let me go ahead and help you. What that means is, when hell is on holiday, when you're dealing with all kind of challenges and difficulties, let me tell you what you got to stop doing. You can't rebuke it. You can't bind it. You can't put your foot on it. You can't send it back to hell. Instead of always rebuking it, sometimes you ought to thank God for it. Instead of having a pity party about it, sometimes you ought to thank God for it. Now somebody says, I ain't clapping to that because that sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy, but let me help you. You see, why God didn't stop it from happening, he didn't let it happening stop you. Somebody just did what I said. I said God didn't stop it from happening, but he did not let it happening stop you. In other words, he let some stuff come in your life that you questioned, that you wondered about, that you did not like, but when you managed the misery, you came out on the other side stronger. You came out better. You came out wiser. Do I have just one witness that can testify that the stuff that was supposed to decimate you, God used it to elevate you? The enemy thought he was tearing you down, but God used that thing to build you up. You and I have to arrive at a place where when things happen in our lives and around our lives that don't make sense, that we don't like, that we don't understand, we have to be mature enough to know that God's plans go beyond what we're able to understand. Isaiah says his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, and because of that, watch this, you cannot discern or determine ultimate outcome based solely on present actions. I wish I had somebody. That means you can't look at your today and determine what your tomorrow is going to be, because there's some folk in here that can testify you had a hard year last year, but God is blessing this year. You had a hard week last week, but God is blessing this week. You didn't feel the best on yesterday, but you feel all right today. Is there anybody that knows that God has a plan that we don't always understand? But I need you to understand that disappointments are a part of life. But wait, and despair does not have to be your only response. When hard times come, you ain't got to ball up in the middle of your bed, stop answering your phone, close your blinds, and feel sorry for yourself. Listen, what I'm trying to get you to understand, watch this thing to God. When trouble comes, there is a way to manage your misery. The text suggests, I love this, that when life gets rough, Billy, when God is acting crazy, when you don't understand what he's doing, when you can't make sense of it, you have to remember who you are in the midst of where you are. I wish I had some. That was somebody's word right there. You got to remember who you are no matter where you are. Is there anybody that knows no matter what you go through, it doesn't change who God has called you to be? No matter what you go through, it doesn't change who God has called you to be.